Lately I've been spending my time with 4 Canon full-frame DSLRs. And while yes, obviously I knew I was making a video about it, didn't really approach it that way. Just sort of lived with the 4 cameras. And if I went somewhere, I brought at least one of the 4 cameras along, often more than one, frequently all 4. And I have the backache to prove it. For the sections of the video where I'm shooting all 4 simultaneously, I went back and forth on to what extent I wanted to hide which camera shot what, versus just being straightforward about it. Ultimately, I decided not to hide it, but keeping it unpredictable seemed a good approach to help eliminate bias. So if you think the 5D is your favorite and you see the 5D pop up into the frame and you watch that square, it very likely will not be the 5D image in that same square. It's just all random. This was my silly attempt to just keep one's eye fresh so that someone doesn't fixate on one square, or the eye doesn't immediately pop over to the camera they want to prefer, if that makes sense. All images are JPEG straight out of camera. All images were shot with the standard picture profile, auto white balance, autofocus, manual exposure. All lens corrections are turned off on the cameras that offer that. Noise reduction completely turned off. Also, I'm colorblind, so I don't know if it's just me, but the only camera that I can reliably spot, basically without fail, is the 5D. It's just super apparent. Love it or hate it, that camera really has a signature look. The others, at least without looking at them individually on a large screen or zooming in, all look incredibly similar to me in a grid arrangement like what we've been doing so far. Native ISO of the 5D is 100 to 1600, expandable to 50 to 3200. Native ISO of the 5D Mark II is 100 to 6400, expandable to 50 to 25600. Native ISO of the 6D is 100 to 25600, expandable to 50 to 102,400. And the native ISO of the 6D Mark II is 100 to 40,000, expandable to 50 to 102,400. So the 5D, let's focus on that for a little while. I own the 5D. I'm quite familiar with it. I shoot with it a lot, for YouTube, for personal stuff, for professional work. It's a great camera. It's a camera that I love. Missed focus though in the very first shot. It does that though. It's a second-tier camera from 2005, and that is sometimes apparent. And I make that particular distinction because I also shoot with some even older bodies, but they're flagship bodies. They came out earlier than the 5D, but don't necessarily have all the same limitations. The 5D was not meant to be top of the line. It was meant to bring full frame to a wider audience, and it was very successful in that regard. And again, a really great camera, but with some compromises. I feel those compromises when I shoot with it. But what's good about this camera is so good that I basically use it all the time anyway. But let me start with those compromises, or the grievances that I have. The highlight alert only works when you're in the info screen, where the photo you just took is tiny. So you either just have to leave it set that way, thus not using your entire back screen to review your images, or you have to drill down into the info screen and back every time. That's annoying as fuck, because watching your highlights is all the more important with a camera this old, unless you just don't mind blowing them out. In certain cases I don't mind, I even like it, but generally speaking I'm trying to preserve highlight detail. All 3 of the other cameras show the highlight alert if you want it to. If you want them to, while the images are full screen. The 260s even allow you to view a histogram overlaid on top of the full frame image, and the 2 5Ds do not. You can get a histogram, but you have to drill down into the info screen. The 5D does not display the ISO in the viewfinder. This is super annoying to me. I often change ISO with the camera up to my face, and I often do so because I'm reminded to do so because it's right there in the viewfinder. That also annoys the crap out of me. The LCD screen on the back of the 5D is noticeably more primitive. Again, all the more reason to have a highlight alert. because you can't really make much of a determination based on the screen alone. That being said, it is more than good enough in terms of just getting a feel for what you shot, judging your composition, and so forth. The menu is super primitive, but it's really not a problem because there just isn't all that much to be done in the menu. You don't need to spend that much time in there, so I would actually consider that an advantage of this camera. It's just very singularly focused. It's a simple device that takes photos. No video capabilities, whereas the other three cameras all shoot 1080 video. 5D also has no live view, but I think that's for the best. Again, just I like that it's such a simple device. That's really part of the appeal of it. All three of the other cameras support all the different flavors of LPE6 Canon batteries. The same as my R5 uses. That makes them really convenient to add to an existing workflow. But the 5D uses an older BP511A battery. Though they're still easy to find and they're cheap. I also have a Canon 10D and it's the same battery, so that kind of works for me as well. But I would prefer it use the other battery. That would be a little easier. It shares an autofocus pattern with the 5D Mark II, but the 5D Mark II's autofocus system is a lot better. And the 6D's is a little better than the 5D Mark II. And the 6D Mark II just absolutely crushes all of them. It's significantly better. More on that later. But here's the headline, and I'll reiterate this later. The 5D misses focus a lot. The 5D Mark II and 6D miss focus sometimes, though they're pretty solid. Solid but not amazing. The 6D Mark II's autofocus is legitimately amazing. Never misses focus. Though with the 6D Mark II, it's a little bit more complicated than that. There are two distinct approaches to autofocus, and one of them is a lot more blunt and prone to miss than the other. But I'm derailing myself. We'll get to that. A couple of things I don't care about, but you might, so I'll mention them. The 5D has no auto ISO of any kind. No customizable menu. Neither of the 5Ds have an in-camera level. Now, if you think of the 5D as something more akin to a film camera, but with the hassle and expense of film removed, you will be very pleased with it, I dare say. That's more or less exactly what it is and how I think of it. That's what it feels like to hold and to shoot. That's what it sounds like, even. It's the digital camera that feels most like a film camera that I've ever shot with. And I don't mean to slam film photography. I haven't shot a frame of film in quite a while, year and a half. Well, I hadn't until very recently, but I'm actually super excited to get back to it. Mix it back in with my digital photography again. And soon, very, very soon, I'm going to. Only I won't be developing it myself anymore. That's just too much work. That's what caused me to stop shooting film back a year and a half ago. But while the 5D has limitations, it also has honesty. In the way that film cameras feel more honest. Maybe. Perhaps. So does the 5D. When I first bought my 5D, I was completely blown away by it. I had heard all the hype. Figured it was bullshit. So I avoided it for years, and then I experienced the discovery for myself that it really is that special. And that was pretty cool. Is it my absolute favorite digital camera of all time? No, it's not. But it's up there, very high on the list. I guess what I'm saying is, if you want my initial gut reaction to the 5D, everything I love about it, I've made that video already. I captured that as it was happening. Go take a look at that video. I can't fake it here. Instead, I'll give you something more concise, whereas you're going to get something maybe closer to my initial gut reaction to the 6D Mark II when we get there. Maybe, I guess, if that matters, because it was my first time shooting with it. With the 5D, the layout, I suppose the feeling of holding it, for sure. It's so hard to describe. The weight, the apparent simultaneous hollowness and solidness makes it feel like a film camera. There's clunkiness and there's refinement. If you've ever shot a 90s era Canon film SLR. That's exactly what this feels like. It's just a little more solid, a little more refined. Saying it is one thing, but it's really true. You hold it and you kind of instantly get it. The shutter sound is ridiculously satisfying. Contributes to that old school feel. It literally sounds like it's advancing film after you take a shot. At least that's how I perceive it. The colors straight out of the camera are special. I'm not going to attempt to describe them, except to say it's a very warm tone that it gives you. It seems to bring out the best in just about everything, with one exception. Clouds. I love the way it renders an empty sky, but sometimes white clouds look a bit coffee stained or something. But also it's not just the color, it's also the weak anti-aliasing filter. And I had no idea I liked the look of a thin AA filter until I used this camera. Again, it's hard to describe until you're working with the files on a big screen. They just pop a little bit more, irrespective of the color it's giving you. There's a natural sharpness to the images that make them stand out. And it's worth noting here that I own the 5D and the 5D Mark II, but the 60 and the 60 Mark II are loans. Paul Sebring, fellow with a YouTube channel you might enjoy, loan them to me. Link in the description. It's raining as I record this narration, so if you hear the sound of rain, but you don't see rain in the video, that'd be why. The 5D Mark II is a camera that I know maybe too well. I've been shooting with it since it launched. For years, a decade plus, it was my main work camera. Weddings, portraits, corporate stuff, all of it. And that took a toll. The enjoyment factor associated with this camera dropped well past the fucking floor. I associated it with stress and deadlines and bitching clients. Just bad vibes all the way around. It did its job. It did it well, but I never looked forward to picking it up. And outside of work stuff, I basically never did. Like, you go back in time before the 5D Mark II, and you'll see lots of nice photos of my family shot on various DSLRs. And then it just stops, and you get phone photos only for years. And then it picks right back up on the day I bought my first mirrorless camera. Not that I necessarily love mirrorless more. In fact, I definitely don't. But it was new. It was different. No pre-existing association. But lately, as I've gotten more into these older DSLRs again, especially for YouTube, I've found myself reaching for the Mark II more and more, just because I want to. Taking it with me into the wilderness, just shooting for myself. And weirdly, it's starting to feel like a completely different experience, a completely different camera now. The association's different. I've, to some degree, been able to let go of the past, but I never forgot how great this camera is, even during the dark years when it had lost any sense of fun. I still thought of it as an ass-kicking tool. I just needed time. Space. I needed space-time. With the 5D Mark II gone is any sense of hollowness that characterizes the feeling of the 5D in the hand, replaced by absolute solidness with the Mark II. Both of the 5Ds use compact flash cards, and both of the 60s use secure digital cards. That's CF and SD to the uninitiated. So that's advantage 6D as far as I'm concerned, for the convenience factor, as SD cards are still fairly ubiquitous, although advantage 5Ds for the nostalgia factor. None of the four have dual card slots, which could potentially be a deal breaker for some. Not a deal breaker necessarily for me. I have mixed feelings about it. It's complicated. Both 5Ds have a PC sync port, while neither 6D does. Neither 5D has built-in Wi-Fi, both 6Ds do. And this is a big one for me. Neither 5D has internal GPS, while both 6Ds do. I would love to have internal GPS. I feel so cheated that my R5 doesn't have it, and these 60s do. The 5D offers no internal lens correction of any kind. The 5D Mark II offers only peripheral illumination correction for correcting illumination along the periphery. And the 61 offers peripheral illumination correction and chromatic aberration correction. The 60 Mark II gives you everything: peripheral illumination, chromatic aberration, distortion, and diffraction. And this is a huge one for me, greater than every other consideration combined. Both 5Ds have a max shutter speed of 1/8,000th of a second, while both 60s max out at 1/4,000th of a second. Not good 60s. That is really a pain in the ass to work around in bright sunlight if you shoot with fast prime lenses wide open. It really is the case. Similar to something I said in a previous video, my review of the 60, no doubt. The 60s both are such good performers in low light. So if you have one of each, a 5D and a 60, a good strategy might be to favor a 5D for daytime shooting outdoors and a 60 for night shooting or indoor shooting. So with all that context in mind, let's get more into the 5D Mark II specifically, a little bit. It's a camera I know inside and out, literally, not just technically, but emotionally. I've used it for so long, for so many jobs. It was a loyal work tool. Now it's becoming a friend. Technically it's dated, I suppose, but I don't know if this is just because I'm also dated. It doesn't really feel dated to me. Not in the way that the 5D most definitely does feel dated. The screen on the back is large, bright, and easily viewable in sunny conditions. The sensor resolution of this and all the 60s are 20 plus megapixels, thus firmly equal to and a touch beyond the highest resolution that it's possible to get with a frame of 35mm film. While the original 5D is 12.8, not bad, definitely in the 35mm film resolution arena, just on the low end of it, but plenty good enough. No complaints. I shoot an 8 megapixel camera quite often, and I'm very happy with those files. So 12.8 is very definitely fine. And I wouldn't want the 5D to shoot at a higher resolution, because any change to that glorious sensor would probably just end up screwing something else up, and it would be lesser overall as a result. The lower resolution is just part of what makes that camera what it is, but 20 plus megapixels is, to me, the next level of camera advancement. It's an important demarcation. That's the point where the DSLR began to outperform the film SLR. And because I'm old enough that film is my frame of reference, that's significant to me. The 5D Mark II certainly doesn't have the dynamic range of most color negative film, but I've come to realize, or at least suspect, that that might be exactly what I like about the 5D Mark II and older DSLRs in general. I love my R5 for what it can do and how it can make the work easier, more consistent, but not for the image characteristics, really. There are times that having more dynamic range is really helpful and really noticeable in a good way, but more often than not, I suspect that I actually prefer less. The images are punchier, more like slide film, though the 5D Mark II has significantly more dynamic range than most slide film, positive film that is. Film made to show straight out of camera, like in a projector, for example. The 5D2 is really historically significant, too, but that's mostly due to its video capabilities. And I'm more of a still photographer, but this is a brilliant camera for stills, and a ridiculously good value for money. That said, the most interesting thing to me when looking at a grid of images from all four cameras is just how similar they look. How any one of these would be a great choice, and you could just pretty much throw a dart and you'd be fine. I've got some items set up on the dashboard here to take a look at ISO performance. It seemed like comparing max native ISOs would be useful, but then after having done it, I'm not so sure it was. Each higher max ISO was noisier than the one before it, as you would expect, despite increasingly newer sensors, though all were extremely usable at max native ISO, except perhaps the 6D Mark II, which just gets noisy to the point of absurdity. But it's ISO 40,000, of course it does. So then I compared the max native ISO of one camera, starting with the 5D, to the same ISO on all the other cameras. And as you would probably expect, the images get a little cleaner as you move your way up the generations, with the 6D Mark II giving us a particularly clean image. Yeah, just really, really impressive for ISO 1600. And that trend continues when I look at the max native ISO of the 5D Mark II as compared to the 260s, the max native ISO of the 61 versus the 62. Newer equals cleaner. Now, to what degree do the camera manufacturers cheat and call something ISO 6400, for example, when they might have called the same level of gain 3200 on a previous generation camera? I don't know. There's no standardization on that. As far as I know, it's up to the manufacturers, so I'm a little suspicious, but without a doubt the trend is that the newer the camera, the cleaner the image in terms of high ISO. So both of the 6Ds perform better than both of the 5Ds by virtue of being newer. But there's not a bad one in the group. The 5D is more limited in terms of ISO, but at max ISO it looks great. It's just that max ISO is pretty low, so it's not really an ideal choice if low light shooting is a priority. But I mean, good grief, use a flash, use a tripod, be resourceful, figure it out. ISO 1600 is a lot here in the real world. So I'm shooting the 6D now. I like this camera, it's very capable, but it doesn't feel as great in the hand to me. Very solid and well built, yes, that's not the issue. And this is purely subjective, of course, but the other three, including the 6D Mark II, have some heft, some bulk that the 6D is lacking. I suppose it depends on what your frame of reference is. If you're used to mirrorless and you like that feel, this might be perfect. For me, though, if I'm going to give up the convenience of mirrorless, I do so because I'm looking for a different experience. So this maybe feels a little bit like shooting a mirrorless camera, but without the benefits of a mirrorless camera. But actually, my R5 feels better in the hand. They're similar in size, but the 6D is a bit bubblier, rounded or something. I don't know, the grip is not comfortable to me. The degree to which it protrudes forward is somehow out of balance with the width of the thing. And my fingers just don't quite bend at the point that the grip expects them to bend. And as a result, I have to squeeze a little harder. Or sometimes what I end up doing to make it more comfortable is shift my grip backward a bit, so that only the tips of my fingers wrap around the front. So I either have to go with uncomfortable or precarious. Those are my two options. But capability-wise, this camera rocks. Super duper ultra mega capable. It can shoot just as well as any other camera, either on this list or not. But for reasons. It's my least favorite of the bunch here. But that's not criticism. This is an extraordinarily good camera. And it's an extraordinarily good group of cameras that we're looking at. One of them has to be my least favorite. It just so happens to be this one. Sorry. I did learn from the comments in a previous video that I did about the 6D that many see it as analogous to the 5D. That's cool. I don't really see it that way. To me, it's much more analogous to the 5D Mark II. But it's great. Honestly, the images look just as good to me as the 5D Mark II. And kind of similar to the 5D Mark II. To my eyes. To my color-deficient eyes. It's the slightly newer and cheaper version of the 5D Mark II. So on the one hand, it has an advantage over the 5D Mark II due to being newer, but also a disadvantage due to being cheaper. But to me, this camera makes a lot more sense when you frame it in its historical context versus looking at it now on the used market. Because to me, it's like it's another 5D Mark II, and I question why it even exists. But it launched around the same time as the 5D Mark III 2012, but for $1,400 less US, and that's massive. Were it 2012 and were I in need of a camera, I would definitely choose the 6D without hesitation over the 5D Mark III. Yes, the max shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second would annoy me to no end, but for that kind of savings, I'd just buy the nicest, most premium ND filters I could find, one for each of my lenses, and I'd still end up saving $1,000 US. The 5Ds both have joysticks, and the 6Ds have D-pads. That's not typically how I move my autofocus point around personally. I'm used to holding the modifier button down using the front and back wheel, so it's not a huge deal for me, though I know that's an important control for many. But that being said, neither 5D is set for direct autofocus manipulation via the joystick by default, but with both cameras you can activate that in the custom functions portion of the menu. Same is true with the 6Ds and the D-pad. Personally, I don't mind a D-pad. I might even prefer it. I really liked the D-pad on my EOS R, which I shot for a handful of years. So I guess either one is fine with me. Joystick is fine, D-pad is fine. What I don't like is how the 6Ds cram 3 controls into one space. The back wheel, the center button, and the D-pad. It's just too much. Wheel plus center button is fine, but the D-pad should be located somewhere else, in my humble opinion. The layout on the EOS R worked really great for me. They brought the wheel up to the top, and the D-pad remained where the back wheel is now. But as is on the 6D, it's just a big jumble of too much going on in one little space. A cluster F, if you will. Where F means fuck, in case that wasn't clear. But you know, bitch, 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 complain, complain, complain. It's a really good camera. I don't mean to just complain about it. If it were the only camera I own or the only camera I'd ever used in my life, it would be just fine because it can do everything. But between the 4 cameras, with a shot like this, where I'm focusing on a tiny target near camera, where any back focusing is going to be extremely noticeable, I could personally really tell that each generation of camera gets progressively better with their autofocus systems. The 5D is not very good. The 5D2 and 6D are pretty decent. And the 6D2 is phenomenal. Hard to illustrate, but it's super duper true. That 6D Mark II just snaps instantly on whatever tiny target you point it at, if you're using the viewfinder. I don't know, I wish I hadn't been quite so negative about the 6D. It's a tough competition. It's not even a competition, it's a celebration of 4 great options. It's absolutely a better camera, objectively speaking, than the original 5D. The 5D wins for me, though, in that it's a more satisfying experience, and the images have way more personality. But if you care more about specs and modern features, I mean, I used to, not modern features, but I used to care more about specs than I do now. The 6D is the clear choice over the 5D. The 6D compared to the 5D Mark II is a much tougher call. I prefer the 5D Mark II, but there's not a clear definitive answer in terms of me recommending one versus the other. I don't have a recommendation, I just have a preference, and that is not the same thing. And my preference is based largely on how the camera feels in my particular hand, and the fact that a faster maximum shutter speed is more important to me than somewhat better high ISO performance. And I just have history with the 5D Mark II, so I have a bias. Here's the 5D's 9-point autofocus system, which is perfectly fine. It gets the job done, but it's not great. And the 5D Mark II's visually identical 9-point autofocus system, though performance-wise the 5D2's system is much improved. And the 6D's 11-point autofocus system, which is nice, The center point, especially in low light, is somewhat improved over the 5D Mark II. And finally, the 6D Mark II's very different 45-point autofocus. And it's unbelievably quick, precise, and honestly just leaves the other three cameras in the dust. And that's autofocus through the viewfinder on the 6D Mark II. The 6D Mark II is a DSLR, but it kind of is also a transformer from DSLR to slightly crude, mirrorless approximation. I say crude because when I first picked this up, I was so excited about the dual pixel AF tap to focus flippy screen arrangement on a native EF body until I used it. It has human face detect, no eye detect. That's okay. I'm happy to use tap to focus instead. But the thing is, the tap to focus is just not precise enough to be as useful as you would hope. You can't get a small little refined box to nail an eyeball. You get a larger box, which is pretty good, but it leaves some uncertainty about where exactly focus is being placed. And thus, in the case of close-up work, it makes shooting via the flippy screen impractical, if not frustrating. And I tend to just stick to the viewfinder, which is very, very precise. That's what I'm doing here. I'm shooting focusing via the viewfinder. And again, as far as viewfinder autofocus goes on an older DSLR, this is certainly among the best out there, at least among the best I've ever used, personally. But here, when precision is not so critical, it's really nice to bust out the flippy screen. You just have to have that expectation set going in order to avoid disappointment. Focusing via the screen, despite having dual pixel AF, is a little bit crude. It's a little crude. While the viewfinder autofocus is not crude at all, it's extremely refined and accurate. Because I didn't know that going in, I picked this thing up and my first thought was something like, shit, I'm about to fall in love again. I'm about to start lusting after another camera. Do not need to be spending more money on cameras. Because again, the 60s are on loan from Paul Sebring. Go take a look at his photography YouTube channel. Because, okay, I shoot an R5, but I used to shoot an R. And the R5's autofocus is a big improvement over the R, but the R was really good in most situations. So pairing something like the R's autofocus system with a camera that shoots on EF lenses natively, plus the option to switch to an optical viewfinder. Literally, if that camera existed, I would definitely have to own it. But the autofocus, as mentioned or alluded to, is not nearly as good as even the EOS R when using the back screen. Honestly, the back screen is only suitable for either shots at a great distance or cases where you're just shooting random objects, capturing shape and texture. Because if focus ends up slightly forward or slightly back, in a case like that, it doesn't really matter that much most of the time. Probably not even noticeable. Not even to you, probably. But of course you're less stable shooting things at a great distance when you're holding the camera out like this, so you're probably better off sticking it up to your eyeball. Plus this camera has no in-body stabilization. Double bummer. Okay, so this is not quite the camera I hoped it was initially. I guess ultimately what I hoped for was like a native EF body, certainly. It is that, but a screen-first camera UI with the option of an optical viewfinder, native EF body. When in reality it's an optical viewfinder first DSLR with some decent but limited screen capabilities. Alright, fair enough. It's just, if you're gonna do it right. It's so good as a traditional viewfindered DSLR. It should be that only, and then it would be like one of the best DSLRs ever. Maybe the expectations were different at the time, but to me, the addition of the screen just communicates the wrong idea. It gives me a concept of the identity of this camera that's just not true, and it's unfortunate because it gets in the way. And yeah, you could just not use the thing, but I don't know how long it would take for that to not be frustrating, that it's hinting at something that it can't quite deliver. Anyway, yes, I used to own an EF to RF adapter, but I sold it because at some point I had decided to use only RF lenses on RF bodies and EF lenses on EF bodies. But that didn't work out. And it's a silly distinction, so I got over it. And I recently bought another adapter. But the 6D Mark II feels roughly as good in the hands as the two 5Ds. It's an upgrade over the 6D in that regard, in my opinion. Also, there's a nice little resolution bump. 26 megapixels. 6 more than the 6D, which might not sound like a lot. And it's not, I suppose, but I shoot on a 10D, and that's a 6 megapixel camera. So in the case of it, that's the difference between having an image and not having an image. So it's not that insignificant. At this point, yes, I've been bitching about the back screen. I'm starting to realize that the back screen is actually pretty useful. And I'm really not seeing any missed focus. Only when I was photographing my cat did I see missed focus. And my wife, actually. That didn't make it in the video. But after a couple of days of shooting with it, I'm legitimately starting to appreciate that this camera has that back screen. It's just that the viewfinder is so good. So to choose to shoot with the back screen is a choice to do so with much less precision, and that sucks. If you just want to own a super capable camera with plenty of room to grow for as little money as possible, definitely go for the middle. Get either a 5D Mark II or a 6D. Between the two, I don't really have a recommendation. I just prefer the 5D Mark II. If you're just super enamored with the idea of shooting from a articulating screen, despite the limitations, on a budget, or autofocus is super critical and you don't mind using the viewfinder, get the 6D Mark II, no question. If photography is more about pure art to you, get a 5D. But if I've learned anything in the process of making this video, it's that all four cameras are basically great choices and all are capable of producing similarly excellent results. But get a 5D.